We are up to Book 9 in the NazActs, working our way through the Rock of a Sure Foundation. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. On the following day, Peter, along with us, hastened early to the place in which discussion had been held the day before. And when we saw that great crowds had assembled there to hear, and saw the old man with them, he said to them, "Old man, it was agreed yesterday that you should confer today with Clement, and that you should either show that nothing takes place apart from Genesis, or that Clement should prove that there is no such thing as Genesis, but that what we do is in our power." To this the old man answered, "I both remember what was agreed upon, and I kept in memory the words which you spoke after the agreement was made, in which you taught that it is impossible for man to know anything, unless he learn from the true prophet." Then Peter said, "You do not know what I meant, but I shall now explain to you. I spoke of the will and purpose of God, which he had before the world was, and by which purpose he made the world, appointed times, gave the law, promised a world to come, to the just for the rewarding of their good deeds, and decreed punishments to the unjust, according to a judicial sentence. I said that this counsel and this will of Yahweh cannot be found out by men, because no man can gather the mind of Yahweh from conjectures and opinion, unless a prophet sent by him declare it. And I did not therefore speak of any doctrines or studies, that they cannot be found out or known without a prophet. For I know that both arts and sciences can be known and practiced by men, which they have learned, not from the true prophet, but from human instructors. Since therefore you profess to be conversant with the position of the stars and the courses of the heavenly bodies, and that from these you can convince Clement that all things are subject to Genesis, or that you will learn from him that all things are governed by providence, and that we have something in our own power, that is, it is now time for you too to set about this." To this the old man answered, "Now indeed it was not necessary to raise questions of this kind, if it were possible for us to learn from the true prophet, and to hear in a definite proposition that anything depends on us and the freedom of our will. For your yesterday's discourse affected me greatly, in which you disputed concerning the prophetic power. Whence also I assent to and confirm your judgment that nothing can be known by man with certainty and without doubt, seeing that he has but a short period of life, and a brief and slender breath, by which he seems to be kept in life. However, since I am understood to have promised to Clement before I heard anything of the prophetic power, that I should show that all things are subject to Genesis, or that I should learn from him that there is something in ourselves, let him do me this favor, that he first begin and propound and explain what may be objected. For I, ever since I heard from you a few words concerning the power of prophecy, have, I confess, been confounded, considering the greatness of foreknowledge, nor do I think that anything ought to be received which is collected from conjectures and opinion." When the old man had said this, I, Clement, began to speak as follows. Yahweh, by his Son, created the world as a double house, separated by the interposition of this firmament, which is called heaven, and appointed angelic powers to dwell in the higher, and a multitude of men to be born in the visible world, from amongst whom he might choose friends for his Son, with whom he might rejoice, and who might be prepared for him as a beloved bride for his bridegroom. But even till the time of the marriage, which is the manifestation of the world to come, he has appointed a certain power to choose out and to watch over the good ones of those who are born in this world, and to preserve them for his Son, set apart in a certain place of the world which is without sin, in which there is already some who are there being prepared, as I said, as a bride adorned for the coming of the bridegroom. For this prince of this world and of the present age is like an adulterer who corrupts and violates the minds of men, and seducing them from the love of the true bridegroom, allures them to strange lovers. So there's a lot, I think, being said here by Clement, things that Peter's touched on before, that the purpose, and this is something we discussed before, because I remember Peter saying this, that the purpose of the creation of the world was to select friends for the Son, that these would be the people who would dwell with him in eternity. And so if you want to kind of break down what is our purpose, what is our mission should be to want to be chosen to be one of these friends. And how do we do that? Well, you do it by seeking the kingdom. You seek after the kingdom, you seek after Yahweh's justice, you seek after the words of the true prophet, and then you bring yourself into alignment with those things. So you align yourself with the kingdom by aligning yourself with God's justice, and the way to align yourself with God's justice is to align yourself with the words of the true prophet. And so here, I think, when we look at these various things that are said about the reason for the world, the goal that we should all strive for, what do we seek after, what do we look for, you begin to see a picture emerge. Somebody the other day was asking about the end of the wicked. What happens to the wicked? Are they thrown into the lake of fire and die? Are they punished for all eternity? What is the destination for them? And personally, I think that at some point there's a judgment, a final judgment. And so the way I see it is right now, if you mess up, you get another chance. Like I do believe in a type of reincarnation. I do think that the Ebionites believed in that, from what I can tell. So you don't get just one shot at it, you get more than one opportunity. But the goal is to move upward, to move toward this ideal of being a friend of the Son. And if at some point there's the final judgment, and the wicked, from what I understand from numerous passages in Scripture, the wicked are destroyed. They're not tortured for all eternity. But I don't personally worry about that too much. It's kind of like, what's the purpose of dwelling on that? All I know is I don't want to be part of that. I'm going for the other end of the spectrum, to be one of the guys that somehow gets into the kingdom and spends eternity with the Son. That's my goal. So I don't focus too much on the other side of that spectrum, because that's not where I want to be. But even till the time of the marriage, which is the manifestation of the world to come, he has appointed a certain power to choose out and watch over the good ones of those who are born in this world, and to preserve them for his Son, set apart in a certain place of the world which is without sin, in which there are already some. So there's some that have already reached this condition of being prepared for him. And as I said, the bride adorned for the coming of the bridegroom. For the prince of this world in the present age is like an adulterer who corrupts and violates the minds of men. So this is what you want to avoid. And if he was corrupting the minds of men when this was written centuries ago, just imagine how much more effective he is today with mass media and the satanic agenda that you see a lot of times manifested in television and movies and Super Bowl halftime shows and pretty much every Hollywood award shows. It's just the Satanism is just it's almost overwhelming to see how blatant and and really mainstream that it's become in the last 20 years or so. But someone will say, how then is it necessary that the prince should be made who was to turn away the minds of men from the true prince? Because God, who, as I've said, wished to prepare friends for his son, did not wish them to be such as by necessity of nature could not be anything else, but such as should desire of their own choice and will to be good, because neither is that praiseworthy which is not desirable, nor is that judged to be good which is not sought for with a purpose, because there is no credit in being that from which the necessity of your nature does not admit of your changing. Again, this is just restating and rephrasing things that Peter has said, that if God made us like, essentially like robots, who had no choice but to be good, if God didn't give us free will, you couldn't be anything else. So how could you expect a reward for something that you have no choice in the matter? Like if you're just kind of pre-programmed to always be good. But what he wants is, he wants us to make our choice. So you choose to be good. You choose to follow the Messiah. So why did he allow, I've heard people ask this question, why did he allow Paul to be inserted in the Bible? Why would God allow that? Well, it is, again, that's something that men did with their own free will. But could he have stopped it? Yeah, I'm sure he could have stopped it. But he wants us to choose. To choose. Jesus warned us numerous times. I've got a video, 7 warnings from Jesus about Paul. Specifically warned about him. The most blatant warning, as far as I'm concerned, is in Matthew 24, where Jesus says, look, if some guy comes along after me and is claiming that he saw a vision of me in the wilderness, don't believe him. If he says that he saw me in the inner room, it's an idiomatic expression, the inner room of the temple. So if you ever hear them speaking about an inner room, that's what they're referring to. It's the inner room of the temple. If you ever hear him speaking about seeing a vision of me in the inner room, don't follow after him. And Paul comes along with 2 visions. One, in the wilderness on the way to Damascus, he claims to have seen Jesus. Jesus plainly said, if somebody says they saw me in the wilderness, don't believe it. Don't believe it. And then later on, later in the book of Acts, I believe it's in Acts chapter 20 or chapter 21, Paul tells a story. It's when he's being arrested after the riot in the temple. He says, he tells this story about an earlier trip to Jerusalem where he was in the inner room of the temple and he saw a vision of Jesus. So the 2 places that Yeshua said, don't believe somebody that comes with these stories. They saw a vision of me in the wilderness, or they saw a vision of me in the inner room. If you get either one of those scenarios where somebody's claiming that, don't believe them. And Paul comes along with both of those scenarios. So the thing is, and people believe it. Like, that's the whole basis for his ministry, is that vision in the wilderness. You were warned. We were warned. We were told not to believe him. We were commanded not to believe him by Jesus. So if we choose not to obey Yeshua's words, when he commanded us not to believe this person, then who's to blame? Is it our fault? Or is it is it God's fault? It's not God's fault, it's ours. We chose not to listen. We chose not to follow the explicit instructions of Yeshua. So, again, it's a choice. He wants us to choose. He doesn't want to force us. And he doesn't want people that are, I think, so brain dead that they can't follow simple instructions. If somebody says this, don't believe them. And then literally billions of Christians are just like following the guy over the edge of the cliff like the Pied Piper. We were told. We were warned. Jesus in Matthew 5:19, he's like, least shall be the man called who teaches you to break the Torah. Yeshua tells us, think not that I came to abolish the Torah or the prophets. I didn't come to abolish, but to fulfill. Right? So he tells you right away, don't think that. And then he says, least will the person be called who teaches you to break the least commandment in the Torah. And guess what Paul's name means? Paul's name literally means least. Least. He called Paul out by the meaning of his name in Matthew chapter 5. He warned us. There's a total of 7 warnings, 7 specific warnings. Those are just 2 of them. It's a choice. You make a choice. Choose this day whom you're going to serve. No man can have 2 masters. There's statements, you will know them by their fruits. There's a number of statements that were not specific warnings that you could also take those statements and apply them to Paul and he would come up wanting. But those are not really specific warnings. Those are general warnings. But he gave 7 specific warnings about Paul, in addition to the 10 or 12 other general warnings. Like if I come in my name or my Father's name and you won't receive me, but if another comes in his own name, him you will receive. And then Paul comes along with my gospel, my gospel, my gospel, right? He repeats that phrase over and over again. Paul came in his own name, and him we received. It's not God's fault. He warned us. His Son came along and told us. He gave us the cheat code to keep from getting misled, and we just ignored him. Therefore, the providence of God has willed that a multitude of men should be born in this world, and those who should choose a good life might be selected from many. And because he foresaw that the present world could not consist except by variety and inequality, he gave to each mind freedom of motions according to the diversities of present things, and appointed this prince through his suggestion of these things which run contrary, that the choice of better things might depend on the exercise of virtue. This is the point. The choice of better things depends upon the exercise of virtue. So exercise your virtue, make good choices, listen when the Messiah speaks, and do what he says. It's that simple. But to make our meaning plainer, we shall explain it by particulars. Was it proper, for example, that all men in this world should be kings or princes or lords or teachers or lawyers or geometers or goldsmiths or bakers or smiths or grammarians or rich men or farmers, perfumers or fishermen or poor men? It is certain that all could not be these, yet the life of men requires all these professions and many more, and without these life cannot be lived. Therefore, inequality is necessary in this world. Oh man, that would really upset some Democrats there. For there cannot be a king unless he has subjects over whom he may rule and reign, nor can there be a master unless he has one over whom he may bear sway, and in like manner of the rest. There cannot be a king unless he has subjects over whom he may rule and reign. Speak a lot about this, the meaning of this word pisteo. Those who pisteo unto me, as is said by Yeshua numerous times in the Gospel of John. And pisteo is usually mistranslated as believe. In fact, it's always mistranslated as believe in every translation except for the rock of a sure foundation. Like this book that we're reading right here, this translation, this is the only one that has it right. The pisteo, when it's said in regards to a person, it doesn't mean just believe. It means you accept that person as your Savior, as your Lord, as your King. You submit yourself to His will. You take His words as ruling upon the way you live your life, and you obey that person. That's what pisteo means when it's said in regards to a person. You are submitting yourself to that person. It means obey. It means to obey or submit yourself to someone. So your translators are misleading you in every other English translation besides the Rock of a Sure Foundation, because they tell you that you just got to believe. But the thing is, if Yeshua is a king, he's a king of kings. A king comes to rule, and he rules through his legislation. If you love me, keep my commandments, right? And if you have a king, you obey the king. You don't just believe that the king exists. Therefore, the Creator, knowing that no one would come to the contest of his own accord while labor is shunned, that is, to the practice of those professions which we have mentioned, by means of which either the justice or the mercy of everyone can be manifested, made for men a body susceptible to hunger and thirst and cold, in order that men, being compelled for the sake of supporting their bodies, might come down to all the professions which we have mentioned by the necessity of livelihood. For we are taught to cultivate every one of these arts for the sake of food and drink and clothing, and in this the purpose of everyone's mind is shown, whether he will supply the demands of hunger and cold by means of thefts and murders and perjuries and other crimes of the sort, or whether, keeping justice and mercy and self-restraint, he will fulfill the service of imminent necessity by the practice of a profession and the labor of his hands. So in everything we do, whether it's our profession or our spiritual life or the way we raise our families, there's a choice. You can supply yourself the demands of hunger and cold and such through thefts and murders and perjuries and such, or you can take up honest work and earn your living by the sweat of your brow. Everything is a choice. You have a choice between righteousness or wickedness in every facet of your life. For if he supply his bodily wants with justice and piety and mercy, he comes forth as a victor in the contest set before him, and is chosen as a friend of the Son of God. But if he serve carnal lusts by frauds, iniquities, and crimes, he becomes a friend of the prince of this world and of all demons, by whom he is also taught this, to ascribe to the courses of the stars the errors of his own evil doings, although he chose them of purpose and willingly. For arts are learned and practiced, as we have said, under the compulsion of the desire of food and drink, which desire, when the knowledge of the truth comes to anyone, becomes weaker, and frugality takes its place. For what expense have those who use water and bread and only expect it from God? There is, therefore, as we have said, a certain necessary inequality in the dispensation of this world. Since indeed all men cannot know all things and accomplish all works, yet all need the use and service of almost all. And on this account it is necessary that one work and another pay him for his work, that one be servant and another be master, that one be subject, another be king. But this inequality, which is a necessary provision for the life of men, divine providence has turned into an occasion of justice, mercy, and humanity, that while these things are transacted between man and man, everyone may have an opportunity of acting justly with him whom he has to pay wages for his work, and of acting mercifully to him who, perhaps through sickness or poverty, cannot pay his debt, and of acting humanely toward those who by their creation seem to be subject to him, also of maintaining gentleness toward subjects, and of doing all things according to the law of Yahweh. For he has given a law, thereby aiding the minds of men, that they may the more easily perceive how they ought to act with respect to everything, in what way they may escape evil, and in what way tend to future blessings, and how, being regenerate in water, they may by good works extinguish the fire of their old birth. For our first birth descends through the fire of lust, and therefore by the divine appointment this second birth is introduced by water, which may extinguish the nature of fire. and that the soul, enlightened by the heavenly Spirit, may cast away the fear of the first birth, provided, however, it so live for the time to come, that it do not at all seek after any of the pleasures of this world, but be, as it were, a pilgrim and a stranger and a citizen of another city. This, I won't dwell too long on this, but what is being said here, it actually lines up with what was said in Professor Mendenhall's book, Ancient Israel's Faith and History, about the original covenant. The original covenant consisted of the Ten Commandments. And we shouldn't view the Ten Commandments as every single command. That it was kind of like a sampling of 10 commitments. He refers to them as the 10 commitments. And so the commitments were there to teach you how a person in covenant with the Creator should behave. And so by following these 10 commitments and understanding them, when a situation arises that's not covered in those 10 commandments, you can use those as an example of how to act in a future scenario. It's not like the 10 commandments are the only commands you have to follow, but they set the stage. They create an example for you to follow, so that when issues arise which are not covered by the 10 commandments, you can use the way that you're expected to behave in those examples that are covered as a way to come up with the proper behavior for other situations. And over time, commandments were added. That's where we get all the rest of the commandments in Torah. Those are kind of like case law, where priests or magistrates or whoever was in a place of authority in ancient Israel would run upon those other situations, and they would confer together and come up with a correct way to address those situations. And that's why 10 commandments turned into 613 or 737 or whatever it is that people have counted it up with various totals. But the point is how the reason for the 10 commandments is so that you could more easily perceive how you ought to act in respect to everything, which this is actually saying the same thing Professor Mendenhall was saying. I found that interesting. It stood out to me as we read this paragraph. But perhaps you will say, in those things indeed in which the necessity of nature demands the service of arts and works, anyone may have it in his power to maintain justice and to put what restraint he pleases upon his desires or his actions. But what shall we say of the sickness and infirmities which befall men, and of some being harassed with demons and fevers and cold fits, and some being attacked with madness or losing their reason, and all those things which overwhelm the race of man with innumerable misfortunes? To this we say that if anyone consider the reason of the whole mystery, he will pronounce these things to be more just than those that we have already explained. For God has given a nature to men, by which they might be taught concerning what is good, and to resist evil. That is, they may learn arts, and to resist pleasures, and to set the law of Yahweh before them in all things. And for this end he has permitted certain contrary powers to wander up and down in the world, and to strive against us, for the reasons which have been stated before, that by striving with them the palm of victory and the merit of rewards may accrue to the righteous. That's interesting. Interesting statement. It's almost like by allowing the wicked prince to exist, it's given you an enemy to vanquish. By striving with them, the palm of victory and the merit of rewards may accrue to the righteous. From this, therefore, it sometimes happens that if any persons have acted without self-restraint, and have been willing not so much to resist as to yield, and to give harbor to those demons in themselves by their noxious breath, an intemperate, ill-conditioned, and diseased progeny is begotten. For while lust is wholly gratified and no care is taken in the copulation, undoubtedly a weak generation is affected with the defects and frailties of those demons by whose instigation these things are done. And therefore parents are responsible for their children's defects of this sort because they have not observed the law of intercourse. Though there are also more secret causes by which souls are made subject to these evils, which it is not to our present purpose to state, yet it behooves everyone to acknowledge the law of God, that he may learn from the observance of generation and avoid causes of impurity, that which is begotten may be pure. For it is not right, while in the planting of shrubs and the sowing of crops, a suitable season is sought for, and the land is cleared, and the things are suitably prepared, fearing perhaps the seed which is sown be injured and perish, that in the case of men only, who is over all things, there should be no attention and no caution in sowing his seed. There's a lot of children born out of wedlock today that I think, a lot of what's being said here, if we were to pay closer attention to it, it might cut down on some childhood suffering of some of these children. But what it is said of the fact that some who in their childhood are free from any bodily defect, yet in process of time fall into those evils, so that some are even violently hurried on to death. Concerning these also the account is at hand, and almost all the same, for those powers which we have said to be contrary to the human race are in some way invited into the heart of everyone by many and diverse lusts, and find a way of entrance, and they have in them such influence and power as can only encourage and incite, but cannot compel or accomplish. If therefore anyone consents to them so as to do things which he wickedly desires, his consent indeed shall find the reward of destruction and the worst kind of death. But if thinking of the future judgment he be checked by fear, and reclaim himself so that he do not accomplish in action what he has conceived in his evil thought, he shall not only escape present destruction, but also future punishments. For every cause of sin seems to be like flax smeared over with pitch, which immediately breaks into flame as soon as it receives the heat of fire. And the kindling of this fire is understood to be the work of demons. If therefore anyone be found smeared with sins and lusts as with pitch, the fire easily gets the mastery of him. But if the flax be not steeped in the pitch of sin, but in the water of purification and regeneration, the fire of the demons shall not be able to be kindled in it. But someone will say, and what shall we do now, whom it has already happened to us, to be smeared with sins as with pitch? I answer, nothing but hasten to be washed, that the fuel of the fire may be cleansed out of you by the invocation of the holy name, and that for the future you may bridle your lusts by fear of the judgment to come, and with all constancy beat back the hostile powers whenever they approach your senses. But you say, if anyone fall into love, how shall he be able to contain himself, though we see before his eyes even that river of fire which they call Pharisaical Jew. This is the excuse of those who will not be converted to repentance. But now I would not have you talk of Philagathon. Place before you human punishments, and see what influence fear has. When anyone is brought to punishment for the crime of love and is bound to the stake to be burned, can he at that time conceive any desire of her whom he loved, or place her image before his eyes? By no means, you will say. You see then that the present fear cuts off unrighteous desires. But if those who believe in Yahweh and who confess the judgment to come and the penalty of eternal fire, if they do not refrain from sin, it is certain that they do not believe with full faith. For faith is certain, fear also becomes certain. But if there be any defect in faith, fear also is weakened, and then the contrary powers find opportunity of entering. And when they have consented to their persuasions, they necessarily become subject also to their power, and by their instigation are driven into the precipices of sin. Yeah, I think this is probably a good place to stop. So we got through chapter 11. We'll be picking it up in chapter 12 next time. So thank you for listening, and shalom.